Picture a man standing at the edge of a crowd. He's close enough to hear the noise, close enough to see people pushing toward the teacher from Nazareth everyone has been talking about. But he stays back. He always stays back, because he has learned through years of hard and humiliating experience that getting close to people does not end well for him. He has a skin disease, and in first-century Judea that means he is not just sick. He is legally, socially, and religiously erased. He cannot enter the synagogue. He cannot eat with his family. He cannot walk through a marketplace without announcing himself, calling out, "Unclean, unclean," so that people can step away before he gets too close. He has not felt another person's hand on his shoulder in years, maybe longer. The last time someone touched him with anything other than disgust or pity, he can barely remember. And now he is watching a man who rumor has it has been healing people. He has a decision to make. Here is what this video is about. It is not about miracles in the abstract. It is not about theological arguments over whether these events actually happened. It is not about what Jesus preached or taught or said in the Sermon on the Mount. This is about what Jesus did with his hands, specifically what happened to every single person he touched, or who touched him. Because there is a pattern in the Gospels that most people walk right past. Every time Jesus made physical contact with someone, really reached out and touched them, something got reversed. Something that had been broken for years, sometimes decades, snapped back into place in seconds. Bleeding stopped. Fever broke. Dead people sat up and started talking. But here is the thing that makes this stranger than it sounds. Under the law that Jesus himself grew up with, the Mosaic law, the Torah, the rule book of first-century Jewish life, touching the wrong person did not heal you. It contaminated you. You did not fix the sick person. You became sick yourself, ritually speaking. Uncleanness traveled outward. That was the rule. That was how it had always worked. Until it wasn't. One more thing before we get into the stories. There is one person in this list whose ending nobody talks about. He was touched by Jesus, healed by Jesus, and then hours later was standing in the crowd that handed Jesus over to be killed. We will get to him. But not yet. Let's start at the beginning, with a man nobody would go near. The man makes his decision. He pushes through the edge of the crowd, and people scatter. You can picture it. The parting, the flinching. The way someone would grab a child and step back without even thinking about it, the way you would move away from something dangerous on instinct. He is used to it. He keeps moving anyway, because he has decided that whatever the cost of getting to this teacher, it is lower than the cost of one more year living the way he has been living. He gets through the crowd, he gets to Jesus, and then he does something that must have taken everything he had. He kneels down. And he says, and this is almost word for word from Mark's Gospel, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Not "please heal me." Not "I am begging you." He says, if you are willing. He already believes Jesus can do it. The only question in his mind is whether Jesus wants to. Here's what most people miss. Jesus does not answer that question with words. He answers it with his hand. Before he says a single syllable, he reaches out and touches the man. He touches him. A leper, in public, with witnesses. The Greek word the Gospel writers use for this kind of touch is haptomai, and it does not mean an accidental brush or a polite handshake. It means deliberate, intentional contact. Jesus chose to do this. He did not have to. He could have healed the man from 10 feet away. He had done it before and would do it again. But he reached out. On purpose. Now, under Mosaic law specifically, the purity codes in Leviticus 13 and 14 touching a leper did not heal you. It made you unclean. The contamination traveled outward. That was the system. That was how the ancient world understood illness and holiness and the boundary between them. You do not touch the sick person. You call a priest. You keep your distance. The Mishnah, the collection of rabbinic legal commentary compiled around AD 200, spells out in detailed, almost exhausting precision how far a healthy person should stand from a leper to avoid contamination. Jesus had clearly not read that section. He touches the man. and the leprosy mark says it immediately left him. The direction reversed. Instead of uncleanness traveling from the leper into Jesus, wholeness traveled from Jesus into the leper. The system that had governed ritual purity for over 1,000 years ran backwards in about 3 seconds. Then Jesus speaks, "I am willing. Be clean." That sequence matters. The touch came first. The words came second. Whatever Jesus was communicating in that moment, he communicated it with his hands before he said anything at all. The man has not been touched by another person in God knows how long, and the first touch he receives ends his isolation forever. We move fast now because the next story is shorter but almost as stunning. Jesus walks into the house of Simon Peter in Capernaum. Peter's mother-in-law is there, flat on her back with a serious fever. Luke, who was a physician and tends to be specific about medical details, describes it as a high fever, not a mild temperature, not something you sleep off. She is genuinely ill. Jesus goes to her, takes her hand. The fever leaves, not fades, not gradually improves, leaves. She gets up immediately and starts serving the people in the room. No recovery period, no lying there drained afterward. Just up, moving, functional. It is almost too quick to register, which is maybe the point. That story is in the Gospels not as the main event, but as evidence of a pattern. Touch, reversal, immediate restoration. Hold that thought because the next story is the one that breaks the pattern open completely. There is a woman in Capernaum who has been bleeding for 12 years. You need to sit with that number for a second. 12 years. That is not a temporary condition or a bad month or something you learn to manage. 12 years of her life gone. She had gone to every doctor she could find. Mark tells us she had spent everything she had on medical treatment and had only gotten worse. Which means she had money at some point and now she does not. Which means she had a life at some point and now she does not. Under Mosaic law, a woman with a continuous bleeding condition was considered ceremonially unclean, not as a moral judgment, just as a legal category. And the implications of that were brutal. She could not enter the synagogue. She could not be touched by another person without making them unclean too. Which means no husband, no close friends, no community in any meaningful sense. She has been living on the outer edge of her own life for 12 years. She hears that Jesus is in town. She makes it into the crowd, which itself took courage because she was not supposed to be there, pressing up against people, technically making unclean everyone she brushed against, just by being present. But she pushes through anyway, and she reaches out and touches the hem of his garment, and immediately she can feel it physically in her body. The bleeding stops, but it gets stranger. Jesus stops walking. He turns around in the middle of a crushing crowd and says, "Who touched me?" The disciples think he is joking. There are people pressed against him from every direction. Everyone is touching him. But Jesus says, and Luke records this exactly, he says he felt power go out from him. The Greek word there is Dunamis. It is the root of the word dynamite. It was not a gentle trickle. Something transferred, something real and measurable left his body and entered hers at the moment of contact. She comes forward, terrified because she knows what she just did. She knows she was not supposed to be there. She knows she technically made him unclean by touching him. She falls at his feet and tells him everything. Jesus looks at her and says, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." Daughter. He called her daughter. After 12 years of being untouchable, after 12 years of being legally invisible, he called her daughter in front of the whole crowd. She had reached for the hem of his garment because she was afraid to ask for more. He gave her more anyway. So let us take a breath and look at what we have so far. A leper nobody would go near. A woman who had been bleeding for 12 years and was not even supposed to be in that crowd. A mother-in-law with a fever that should have taken days to break. Every single one of them touched, every single one of them immediately, completely, permanently restored. And in every case the contamination ran the wrong direction. It did not spread to Jesus. it left the person it had been living in. That is the pattern. And we have not even gotten to the dead yet. If this kind of content does something for you, if you are watching this and something is landing, hit subscribe. It helps more than you know. And drop a comment below telling me which story has hit you hardest so far. I read every single one. Because we are not done. Not even close. There is a man pushing through the crowd toward Jesus, and he is not the kind of man who pushes through crowds. His name is Jairus. He runs the local synagogue, which in 1st century Galilee means he is one of the most respected, most socially positioned men in his community. He is the kind of man people come to. He is not the kind of man who runs to anyone. He has a reputation to maintain a community, to lead a position that depends on a certain dignified distance from things that might embarrass him. He throws all of it on the ground the moment he sees Jesus. He falls at Jesus' feet, in public, in front of everyone who knows him. And he begs. His daughter, 12 years old, the same age Miriam, had been bleeding, which is not an accident. The gospel writers knew exactly what they were doing with that number. His daughter is dying. He says, "Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." Put your hands on her. He is not asking for a prayer or a word spoken from a distance. He is specifically asking for physical contact, because by now word has gotten around about what happens when Jesus touches people. Jesus goes with him. And this is where it gets remarkable. On the way to Jairus' house, the crowd presses in, and the woman with the issue of blood reaches out and touches the hem of his garment, and the whole Dunamis moment happens. The power goes out. Jesus stops and asks who touched him. This takes time. And while it is taking time, someone arrives from Jairus' house with the news that every parent alive dreads more than anything else in the world. Your daughter is dead. Don't bother the teacher anymore. You can imagine what that does to Jairus' face. You can imagine the way his legs must have felt in that moment. The worst thing that can happen to a parent had just happened to him in public, in the middle of a crowd, while he was standing next to the one person he believed could have stopped it, and they had been delayed. They had been standing there talking about who touched a hem while his daughter was dying. Jesus turns to him immediately. He says, "Don't be afraid, just believe." They get to the house. There are already mourners there, professional mourners, which was standard practice in 1st century Jewish culture, people paid to weep loudly at the death of a community member. They are doing their job. Jesus walks in, looks at them, and says, "The daughter is not dead, but sleeping." They laugh at him. Luke the physician records this with a clinical flatness that makes it land harder. They laughed at him, knowing she was dead. Jesus puts them all outside. He takes the girl's hand. Touching a corpse under Mosaic law made you unclean for 7 days. Not ritually inconvenient, actually formally, legally unclean. You had to go through a purification process. Everyone in that room knew this. Jesus reached for her hand anyway, and he speaks. Mark keeps it in Aramaic, the actual language Jesus used in that moment, raw and unpolished, not cleaned up into formal Greek. Talitha kumi. Little girl, get up. Not be raised, not a theological declaration, just little girl, get up. Like a father waking a child on a normal morning, she gets up and walks, and Jesus tells them to give her something to eat. That last detail is the one that gets me every time. Give her something to eat. He raises a 12-year-old from the dead, and his immediate follow-up thought is that she is probably hungry. There is something so disarmingly human and tender about that instruction that it is hard to know what to do with it. Stay with me, because the next one is stranger still, and nobody asked for it. Jesus is walking toward a town called Nain with his disciples and a large crowd. Coming out of the town gates is a funeral procession, a young man, the only son of a widow, being carried out on a bier to be buried. The mother is walking behind the stretcher. Luke says Jesus saw her, and his heart went out to her. Nobody stopped him on the road. Nobody fell at his feet. Nobody asked him for anything. He saw a grieving mother, and he stopped the funeral. He walked up to the stretcher. He touched the bier, the wooden frame carrying the dead body. Everyone around him would have known what that meant under the law. He touched it anyway. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, get up. The dead man sat up and began to talk. Not just breathing, not just alive, sitting up, talking. The first recorded words of a man who had just been dead are not preserved for us, which is honestly one of the most tantalizing gaps in the entire New Testament. We do not know what he said. We just know he said something. And Jesus gave him back to his mother. Now here is the part nobody tells you. The woman bent double in Luke chapter 13 has been that way for 18 years. 18 years of looking at the ground, of not being able to raise her head of a body that had curled in on itself so completely she had probably forgotten what it felt like to stand upright. Jesus sees her in the synagogue. He calls her forward. He puts his hands on her. She straightens immediately. Luke says she began praising God the moment it happened. And the synagogue ruler is furious, not because a miracle just happened, because it happened on the Sabbath, because Jesus had looked at 18 years of suffering and decided the calendar did not get a vote. The ruler tells the crowd there are 6 days for healing, come on those days, not the Sabbath. Jesus is not impressed. He points out that every single person in that synagogue unties their ox or donkey and leads it to water on the Sabbath. They do it without thinking twice. And this woman, he calls her a daughter of Abraham, a title of honor, of covenant belonging. This woman has been bound for 18 years. Is one Sabbath day too much to set her free? The crowd loves it. The religious leaders do not. But here is what matters for our pattern. Jesus touched her publicly, deliberately, on the most watched and scrutinized day of the Jewish week. He did not do it quietly. He called her forward first. He made sure everyone in that room saw exactly what he was doing and why. This was not an accident. This was not convenience. This was a statement dressed up as a healing. We need to talk about the night everything fell apart. It is late, later than it should be. Jesus and his disciples have just finished a meal in an upper room in Jerusalem, and now they are in a garden on the slope of the Mount of Olives, a place called Gethsemane, which in Hebrew means oil press, which turns out to be exactly the right name for what happens there. Because what happens in that garden presses something out of everyone involved. Jesus has been praying so hard that Luke the physician again records that his sweat fell like drops of blood to the ground. The disciples have been sleeping, and now out of the darkness torches, a crowd, armed men, temple guards, and at the front of the group a man named Judas, who uses a kiss to identify the person the soldiers are looking for. His name is Malchus. You almost certainly do not know that name. Most people do not. He appears in the Gospel of John, just John, the only Gospel writer who records his name, as the servant of the high priest Caiaphas. He is not a general. He is not a religious leader. He is staff. He is there because his employer sent him doing his job on a Thursday night in a garden, probably not expecting anything more complicated than a straightforward arrest. Peter does not take this well. Peter pulls out a sword. John tells us it was Peter. The other gospel writers leave him anonymous, which is classic Peter acting first and becoming a story later, and swings it at Malchus. He cuts off his right ear. Clean off. Now watch what happens next. Jesus, who is in the process of being arrested, who is surrounded by armed men, who is hours away from a Roman execution, stops. He reaches down. He touches the ear of the man who came to take him away. And he heals him. This is the last miracle before the cross, the last recorded physical healing in Jesus' ministry on earth. And he spends it on an enemy. Not a follower who earned it, not a desperate woman who fought through a crowd for it, not a grieving father who threw his dignity on the ground and begged for it. A servant of the man who wanted Jesus dead, standing in a garden in the middle of the night holding a torch. Jesus heals him anyway. Here is what we do not know. We do not know what happened to Malchus after that night. History goes quiet on him. We do not know if he went back to Caiaphas' household and watched the trial. We do not know if he was in the crowd that called for Barabbas. We do not know if the touch changed him, if somewhere in Jerusalem in the days that followed, a servant of the high priest started asking questions he had not been asking before. We do not know, but we know the touch happened. We know that in the worst moment of his own life, betrayed, arrested, abandoned, Jesus stopped for one more person, one more ear, one more enemy. That is who he was in the garden. That is what his hands did on the last night he had full use of them. Think about the last time someone did something kind to you in the middle of their own crisis. Not when they had surplus, not when it was easy, when they were the one who needed help, and they stopped for you anyway. You remember it. You will probably always remember it. The body holds on to moments of unexpected grace in a way it does not hold on to much else. Now imagine that moment coming from someone who knew exactly what was waiting for him on the other side of that garden, who could see the cross from where he was kneeling, and he still stopped, he still reached down, he still touched the ear of the man who came to arrest him. We are almost at the end. But there is one more touch, and it is the one that closes the whole story. 8 days after the resurrection, Jesus appears to his disciples in a locked room. Thomas is there this time. Thomas, who had missed the first appearance, who had heard the other disciples' reports, and had said plainly, "Unless I put my finger in the nail marks, unless I put my hand into his side, I will not believe." Jesus walks in. He looks at Thomas. He says, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas touches the wounds. And something in him, something that had been locked up tight behind 8 days of grief and skepticism and the particular loneliness of being the one person who was not there, breaks open. He looks at Jesus and says 8 words that no one in the history of Israel had ever said to another human being standing in front of them. "My Lord and my God." Not my teacher, not my rabbi, not even my risen friend. My Lord, my God. The highest declaration of Christ's identity in all 4 Gospels, and it took a touch to unlock it. Thomas did not get there through argument. He did not get there through someone explaining the theology carefully enough. He got there because Jesus let him put his hands on the wounds. There is something in that worth sitting with. Thomas is famously called doubting. Thomas has been for 2,000 years as if doubt were the defining thing about him. But the doubt lasted 8 days. The declaration that followed has lasted 2,000 years. And it came through contact, through physical, real, undeniable contact with something he could not explain away. Every person in this video got there the same way. Not through argument, through touch. So here is what we have. A leper who had not been touched in years. A woman who had been bleeding for 12, a dead girl who was hungry afterward, a dead young man who sat up and started talking, a grieving father who threw his reputation on the ground in public, a woman who had spent 18 years looking at the floor, a servant of the high priest who lost an ear in a garden and got it back from the man he came to arrest, and a disciple who spent 8 days in doubt and came out the other side with the clearest statement of faith in the entire New Testament. Every single one of them touched, every single one of them changed. No exceptions. No one Jesus touched walked away the same. Here is what I want you to take from this. First, the contamination always ran the wrong direction. That is not a small thing. The entire purity system of the ancient world was built on the assumption that uncleanness spreads outward. You do not touch the sick person. You do not touch the dead person. You keep your distance and you stay clean. Jesus walked into that system and ran it in reverse every single time. Wholeness spread from him, not uncleanness to him. Second, not one person in this video was clean before they reached for him. The leper was legally unclean. Miriam was legally unclean. Jairus' daughter was dead. The widow's son was dead. Thomas was full of doubt. Malchus was an enemy. None of them came to Jesus in a state that qualified them for what they received. They reached anyway. And he met every single one of them exactly where they were. Third, and this is the one I want you to sit with longest, the last person Jesus healed before the cross was not a follower. It was not someone who had earned it or asked for it or even wanted it. It was an enemy. A man who came to take him away in the dark. And Jesus stopped, reached down, touched his ear, fixed what Peter broke, and then went quietly to his death. That is not the behavior of a good teacher. Good teachers do not do that. Good teachers do not heal the people arresting them. That is the behavior of someone who is something else entirely. Something that does not fit neatly into any other category history has ever produced. Which person in this video are you? Are you the leper standing at the edge of the crowd, close enough to see what is happening, but not sure you are allowed to push through? Are you Miriam reaching for the hem because you are too afraid to ask for more? Are you Thomas, not there the first time, carrying 8 days of doubt, needing to touch the wounds before you can believe? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and I want to know. Because here is where this ends. Every person who touched Jesus had their life rewritten. Everyone. The bleeding stopped. The fever broke. The dead sat up. The bent stood straight. The enemy was healed. The doubter believed. The question this video ends on is not historical. It is not academic. It is not about what happened 2,000 years ago in 1st century Galilee. It is about right now. You have been watching this video for 25 minutes. You know the pattern. You have seen what happened to every single person who reached for him. The only question left is whether you will.